Welcome to The Agent's Angle, the premier football podcast on the football agent business. I'm Peter Paleologus.
And I'm Jonathan Booker. On The Agent's Angle this week, we'll be casting an eye over the recently released FIFA International Transfer Snapshot for the mid-year transfer window and some of the information surrounding it in terms of agents.
But more importantly, we'll be looking at some news affecting the football agent world in Germany in terms of the regulations or the lack thereof. We have a special German guest who will be dissecting the decision by a German court not to allow the implementation of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations in Germany.
All that to come on this episode of The Agent's Angle. Here we go again with The Agent's Angle, and safe to say the uncertainty and confusion prevails in the football world, not least when it comes to agent-related matters. And although we make every effort to vary up the content on The Agent's Angle, I think it's fair to warn the audience that this episode is going to contain a quite heavy dose of FFAR.
Yes, this episode does again take us back firmly onto the topic of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, FFAR for a large part. But it's fair to say it is an aspect of the Football Agent Regulations that we only briefly touched on. That is the impact in Germany of a court decision. And FIFA's reply last week actually opened up another dimension to the problems and confusion that's generated amongst agents. If you take into account that next week, over 10,000 are going to sit the exam.
And on the topic of generating questions, we have an apology to make. As it appears, we in recent episodes may have added to that confusion by referring to the 20th of September in terms of the Saudi Arabian transfer window. So just to clarify, the transfer window and registration period in Saudi Arabia from FIFA for men's football does close on the 20th of September, according to FIFA publications. But the transfer window for the Saudi Pro League closed sooner, which has caused some confusion, so we apologise for that.
But also, we've also spoken about bringing someone on, an expert with insights on the football in Saudi Arabia, including the Saudi Pro League and all the deals. It is coming on an upcoming episode. As we know, Saudi football is very much evolving, and there are a lot of complexities, I would say, legalities, competition agreements, and permissions to negotiate. So we need to be careful of that, but we will be bringing in a guest. And on the subject of transfer windows, early this week, FIFA released their football transfer snapshot for September 2023, covering the mid-year transfer period or the summer transfer period for Europe. And although this report is not that in-depth or comprehensive a document, we've taken a look at the agent-related elements of this report.
Yes, Peter, despite the fact I'm no statistical expert akin to Brighton's owner Tony Bloom or Omar Chowdhury at 21st Street, who you mentioned in previous episodes with articles from the likes of The Gauge. And also, I'm not a financial whiz like my friend Kieran Maguire over on the Price of Football podcast. As such, some people may think it a little bit sad that I delve into these statistics in such report, but it is a fact that I hate bad statistics that are misrepresentative, if not misleading and misinformative. So to begin with, on the FIFA International Transfer Snapshot for September 2023, I've picked out some key points from the report itself and also the media that relate to agents either directly or indirectly. Now, the first set of stats relate to the men's game. And the first point is men's spending from the 1st of June to the 1st of September in 2023 was 7.6 billion. And FIFA states that's 10% of the total spending on transfer fees was to club agents, when it actually seems closer to 9%. But what is 1% when it only represents 76 million? Round it up when it suits, round it down when it doesn't. On that exact point, this 10% is compared to 5.8% previously in FIFA Snapshot report. However, 10% is compared to 5.8% not in 2022, but 2013, some 9-10 years ago. So that equates to a rise of 0.3% per year. So on that, do we take it that the regulations on working with intermediaries was successful since 2015? That's a discussion for another day, but I think we know the answer. And since the start of 2023, fees for club agents is 865 million. Note the use of the term club agents here. FIFA may not choose to notice football finances continue to break records, whether it's player sales, club turnover, or even FIFA broadcasting and commercial deals. But it would be interesting to compare the spending and player salary differences for the start of 2023 compared to 2022. Then we can all judge if it's relative or not, as the case may be, across all aspects of football. Why mention 3 months remaining when many transfer windows will be closed? Is it really going to change the figures that dramatically?
That's a very interesting observations, Jonathan. The figures, the snapshot paints a picture, but I think you have to put some nuance and context around it. I know you've highlighted some inconsistencies, but it's quite informative for me, this snapshot, but it also does represent something that is only part of the picture. We also note that for FIFA to get a clearer picture, it would have to be down the track when the clearinghouse, which is now used for training compensation and it's going to be solidarity payments, in 2-3 years, if it comes on board for agent fees, that will give a clearer picture. But everyone's interested in information. Everyone's interested in trends. We're in an interesting situation right now, an interesting fork in the road, if I can call it that, Jonathan.
A big area, of course, that's seeing that rapid growth and development, as we covered on a previous episode with Maria, is the women's game. And the women's game is also covered in this report. Now, the women's game in terms of transactions is stated as $3 million, an increase of close on 141%. But the other interesting thing is that the women's game statistics quote cases where one agent acting on behalf of a club is 73 out of 829 transfers and transactions. That's 9%. So that's an interesting comparison compared to the representation of clubs by agents inferred in the earlier figures with regards to the men's game. So are we seeing a throwback to the past when agents represented players more so than clubs being demonstrated in the women's game? Now, there's several records presented in this snapshot. An all-time high of $7.36 billion spent on transfer fees between the 1st of June and the 1st of September. The milestone of 10,000 mid-year transfers in this window. Nearly 697 million spent on agents' fees, which is also a new record. And transfers in the women's game, as I've also pointed out, have reached new heights. So a list of 4 records there from this one report. No real surprise with such factors as you've mentioned, the post-COVID recovery, the increase in influence of Saudi football, and the general trend of records being broken in football year on year for many years. Now, there's a slight dig as ever from FIFA on agents, especially with what's going on with the FFAR here. But if other figures rise in football, such as transfer fees and salaries, won't agents' fees rise as well?
Yes, they will. If you focus on the women's game, there's huge upside now than there was before in terms of the transfer fees going around, the values of the player contract, and the agent fees obviously correlate with that. So it definitely will rise, as have increases in the transfer market fees in the MLS we've seen the last 5 years. Saudi, you mentioned, EPL keeps growing, the English Premier League. China before it was a big league and paid big agent fees. So there's always going to be an increase. And I want to turn to another research report, which I think is relevant here. It's by the CIES Football Observatory monthly report. It was a number 82 published in February 2023. And I think it raises important points at what you've been discussing here, Jonathan. The report is entitled Inflation in the Football Players Transfer Market between the seasons 2013-14 to 2022-23, so quite recent. Over that sort of 10-year period, there's been inflation in player transfer prices, 116%. That includes add-ons. When we talk about add-ons, we could be talking about sell-on fees, bonuses, other conditional payments, or 90% increase without taking into account conditional payments or add-ons. We know there's been also a tendency in terms of transfers for more clubs, especially since COVID, to add sell-on percentages. Now, clubs are investing more in players, but they're investing a lot of sums on conditional basis, being you perform well or the club performs well, more bonuses. Players like to sign add-ons because that gives them a target for more remuneration. However, this is the interesting thing. The increase in conditional payments in contracts and in the transfer market also affects agents. Because if we look at the FFAR and what it talks about the fee caps, it also mentions conditional payments. So as part of that, agents' fees are also affected. So if there's an increase or an inflation in the transfer market, there will be an increase in agent fees, whether that's based on the base salary or on the add-ons. I know that FIFA have put the caps in place and saying that part of it excludes conditional payments, part of it doesn't. That's a discussion for another day. But as long as the transfer market keeps growing, agent fees at a proportion will grow. That doesn't mean agents are taking 15, 20% of deals or transfers. What it means is there's a bigger pot of money and more agent fees are payable, and there's more deals, there's more loan deals that we've noticed. So that's what it is. And I think that's the picture that's got to be painted, not just solely a massive increase in agent fees.
But as we know, there's a lot of effort here from not just FIFA, but also elements of the agents industry to sway opinion because of these FFAR and the situation we find ourselves in. But one final point at this stage with regards to this FIFA snapshot, and that was a note with regards to Germany. And they were number one in terms of receipts from transfer fees, totaling $1.11 billion. This being the first time ever that clubs from a single association have received more than $1 billion in a mid-year transfer window alone. But on the topic of Germany, I think it's safe to say that at this point in time regarding regulation of football agents and agent-related activity, Germany may have become the Achilles heel in terms of FFAR. And that has been confirmed by none other than FIFA this week, it would seem. Although I would argue FIFA's statements has left a lot of questions for agents, clubs, players, coaches, and even national associations, not just in Germany.
You mentioned Germany, and I want to actually go to Germany. Germany's a hot topic at the moment. We have a guest. We'll be talking about the German Injunction, agents in Germany, but more importantly, an inability of FIFA and the German Football Association to implement the FFAR in Germany. And now it's time to introduce our guest. It's Dr. Joachim Rain. He's a partner and attorney at Schwichard Rechtsanwalt. I probably pronounced that very poorly, and you can correct me, Joachim, on that. Joachim Rain is one of the leading legal experts in the German and international soccer business, and he's also got a proven track record to deal with complex national and international player transfers. Joachim represents most famous German and international clubs, players, coaches, as well as consultants in the football business. He also specializes in drafting national and international transfer contracts, player contracts, and deals with agents as well. He's also as part of Football Legal, which is the international legal journal. He's written a few articles in Football Legal, and they include Player v. Agent in issue 15, as well as the player's right to request disclosure of revenues from an agent, Football Legal edition 14. And finally, he's also represented clients. He's one of the most frequently engaged lawyers at CAS, at the International Sports Tribunal Lausanne, representing clubs, players, coaches, and agents as well as the judicial bodies of FIFA and UEFA. Welcome, Joachim.
Thank you for your introduction, Peter.
Thank you. Really appreciate you coming on to the podcast, because right now it's a very important time in the agents circles. We've had a media release by FIFA that affects not just Germany as a football business, but more importantly also the German agents or agents who've got links to Germany, that they're possibly going to be excluded by the FIFA Football Agent Regulations. And this has caused quite a bit of conjecture in the agent world. And I just want to start, there was a main injunction from the Dortmund court in Germany regarding the FIFA Football Agent Regulation, but also it applied to the DFB, the German Football Association, which generated quite a lot of hypotheticals, quite a bit of confusion. What will happen in relation to the football agent activity in Germany and transactions, especially from the 1st of October? Now, I just want to go very quickly to the FIFA media release at 8th of September, which, in my opinion, made the situation a little bit more conflicted, a little bit more confused. It basically used the term or phrase, a link to Germany, in the sense of any link to Germany is precluded from the FFAR. Now, what is your interpretation, firstly, of the term, but more importantly, the impact of this case? What impact did this Dortmund case have on agents, and especially German agents, and also the implementation of the FFAR in Germany?
Well, first of all, you need to know that it was quite a surprise that a German court rendered us an injunction, because according to German law, like almost every law in the world, requires a certain urgency, requires that you outweigh the interests of the parties involved. And so far, if there were applications for injunctions before against currently applicable intermediary regulations, even if they were successful partially on the merits, they never rendered an injunction. So that was quite a surprise and quite unique, and exposes a huge problem to FIFA, because if there's just a case running, the regulations are applicable as long as they are not definitely set aside by a court. But now the situation changes. The injunction prohibits FIFA from enforcing and implementing them in Germany as long as the injunction is enforced. That was the first surprising thing. And the second thing that you might have wondered about, as you correctly said, Peter, the injunction is dated May 24th, and FIFA's circular letter is dated September 8th. So there is more than 3 months in between. And obviously, one wonders what happened in the meantime. And I can explain you what happened. And that was actually the cause for FIFA to react. Because in August, the applicants to the injunction filed another application to the court and said, look, DFB and FIFA, they do not honor the injunction. They keep on trying, or at least preparing, to implement the regulations. And then the court says, okay, this is a violation of the injunction. And they imposed a penalty of 150,000 euro each on FIFA and the DFB. And obviously both got nervous and said, okay, we need to somehow react. And if you now look at the website, there are in fat letters red remarks that explicitly say these regulations do not apply to Germany. And that is the explanation behind why FIFA reacted now on September 8th.
Thank you for that. FIFA used the term linkage or links with German football, German agents. But what do you think links mean? I mean, does it mean someone who's in Germany or domiciled in Germany, or someone who does deals in Germany from outside? What's your view on this term links? Because it's very vague, and being a lawyer myself, I don't think it's a legal concept, the term links, in terms of the way the law expresses itself. What do you think FIFA used this term links, which makes it quite confusing for a lot of people, especially from outside Germany?
I agree, but I think there is some cases that are quite clear, that are even explicitly mentioned, such as if a club, a player or the agent is German, then there's a sufficient link. However, I was also approached by questions like from a Swiss agent or a Swiss-based agent who is a German national. Does this apply to me? So that is obviously a good question, because he's registered in Switzerland and his company is in Switzerland, but he has German nationality. However, considering the scope of the injunction, I would assume that the understanding of this link must be very broad, because FIFA will be very cautious not to risk another penalty, because the next penalty will be probably 250,000, but that is the utmost amount that they can impose. And then the next level would be that someone will be imprisoned if they keep on violating the injunction. And that is why, in questions of doubt, I assume that they will have a very broad understanding of this link.
Joachim, approaching this from not necessarily a technical and legal perspective, as Peter and yourselves can do, I'm sure there are a lot of agents out there who are not heavily involved in the German football market, but with the global aspect of the game, many agents could find themselves very quickly involved in the German football market. So very simply, from your understanding, what are German agents doing now or should be doing to ensure compliance both domestically and internationally with agent regulations as it stands? Is there or has there been a FFAR, FIFA Football Agent Regulations exam in Germany since the implementation stages by FIFA in January? And also, are German agents sitting the exams and registering in other countries to comply with FFAR in those countries?
To answer your first question, yes, there have been exams. I think there's actually one these days, next week. And they are still being offered because nobody knows what will happen. To add this, there will be an appeal hearing about the Dortmund decision in Düsseldorf in January. So everything might change already in January. From my understanding, as I said, a German agent, even if he registered in the UK, is not bound to the FFAR.
It's a really complicated situation, and apologies in advance. I'm probably going to ask some of those theoretical questions now with some scenarios. So if we've got a German agent by nationality acting in the transfer of a Spanish player from Spain to Brazil, or a Nigerian agent acting in the transfer of a player from one German club to another, or a French agent acting in the transfer of a German player from Italy to Saudi Arabia, or even any transaction, and I mean any transaction involving a German club, whether domestic or international, it's possible, and we're talking theoretical scenarios here, it's possible that these won't fall necessarily under the jurisdiction of FFAR, as they all arguably have a link to Germany, to use FIFA's terminology from the release, especially as in the release, FIFA say they have requested all other national associations to give an exemption to those transactions with a link to Germany. Is that the case?
I would say so, yes, because as I mentioned before, I think the understanding is very broad. And if you read the Dortmund decision, it does not only protect agents, it also protects clubs, because it says that the limitation of performing on the market of clubs is somehow limited by the FFAR. So it's also sufficient if a German club is somehow involved in a transfer, even though it's a foreign player, a foreign country, a foreign agent.
I want to focus a little bit on the practicalities. German players who, from the 1st of October, so maybe the January window, if the Dusseldorf decision doesn't go a certain way, if they want to transfer overseas and they've got obviously German agents, how would the German agents be able to work overseas? Is a lot of them going to take the FFAR exam, or would they have to rely on other international agents in order to facilitate those transfers? Because German players will be asking, we don't have the FIFA license, how do we get that transfer overseas in January or the next summer window? Has that been raised at all?
No, it hasn't. But many German agents do have the FIFA license, especially those who held it until 2015, who could reactivate it. Many of them did so just to be prepared, because when the FFAR were announced in December or January, nobody could know what will happen later. And so most of the German agents do hold the license. However, if you read the decision, even if you have to subject yourself while applying the license to the FFAR and other regulations, the decision says that it's not admissible or not legal to require that you subject yourself to these regulations. So they hold the license but are not bound to the regulations according to this decision. And I think that they can rely on that abroad as well, because now that FIFA made this publication, that the regulations do not apply if there's any link to Germany. I think the German agent can also say, if he just does a transfer, let's say from Newcastle to Manchester of a Spanish player, look here, FIFA says, I'm not bound, so we can agree whatever we want to agree.
The regulations are working with intermediaries. They cease on the 1st of October. The FFAR can't be applied in Germany. In terms of going forward from the 1st of October, what do you foresee to happen in Germany, especially with the German agents and German players and also the German clubs? Do you see any quick stop solution by the Federation, or any other regulations are proposed to be able to deal with the situation or the vacuum?
No.
That's the
I don't think so, because actually I met the lady in charge at the German FA 2 weeks ago on occasion of a hearing there. And I, of course, curious as I am, I asked her, when do we get the national regulations and what are you going to do? On one side, in order to comply with your obligation towards FIFA to release national regulations, on the other, not to violate the injunction. And she said, okay, well, what we will have to do is to draft regulations that are very, very short, because the injunction does not give us too much room to release any regulations anymore. But that was 2 weeks ago, and I think that is history after FIFA's publication, because I think they consulted with each other and saw that it makes no sense to release such new regulations that do not really have a real scope, because whatever they might regulate is strictly forbidden or at least restricted by the injunction. And so I would expect that we will not have new regulations until the injunction is either lifted or it has become binding. But until it becomes binding, that can take years, because let's assume that in Düsseldorf in January, the injunction is confirmed, which, to be honest, is my expectation, because under German law and European antitrust law, I think the decision is very reasonable, and I do not share the interpretation of the Court of Arbitration for Sports that I basically appreciate. But this decision, when I read it first, I did not understand it. And if you compare both, the Dortmund decision is much more convincing. So what I wanted to say is, since we are only at the stage of an injunction, normally a main procedure will follow. So this is only the urgent procedure, the injunction, and then you can file another claim to open a main case. I'm not sure if this will happen, because there are only legal questions at stake. So I don't see how a court that has rendered an injunction very detailed dealing with legal questions will take another decision in the main procedure. However, this can happen. And if this happens, then it will take years. And you must also be aware that there are 2 cases already pending before the European Court of Justice. One is related to the currently applicable regulations that, of course, expire in a few weeks. However, I would say if the European Court of Justice says even those regulations are void because they limit the agents too much, then in any case, this also applies to the FFAR. And the second case pending before the European Court of Justice is actually a case about the FFAR. There was another claim filed to a German court in Mainz, and they suspended their procedure and sent the case to the European Court of Justice, because they said, look, this is European antitrust law, so you better decide about it. And that is why not only the Düsseldorf case, the appeal, might be relevant for the further development, but also the European Court of Justice cases, which, of course, is a superior instance.
That links in quite nicely with my next question, actually, because putting aside those cases which were obviously based on the FFAR when they were released in January and what we knew before then, but would I be correct in saying that this additional statement now from FIFA, this link to Germany, as they term it, has it opened up a whole new set of problems for FIFA and FFAR from an anti-competition and European law perspective, as arguably it puts German football participants and those with a link to Germany in terms of agent activity at a competitive advantage to others, not least the clubs?
Definitely, I absolutely agree. And to be honest, after this publication was released last week, I was already contacted by colleagues from all over the world, like Brazil and so, and they asked me, look, does this not open a business model for us? I give you an example. Let's assume the FFAR apply and the agent is entitled to only 3 plus 3%. So at least in countries like Germany, where contrary to England, there was no tripartite contract, the players are not used to pay the agent, so it's difficult enough to convince them to pay their 3%. So in the worst case, the agent ends up with 3%. Let's assume it's a French agent who, under these new circumstances, would only get 3%. What does he do? He contacts a German agent and says, let's do the deal together. You are the agent that is doing the contract. You can agree to 10%. You get a service fee of, let's say, 2 or 3. and I get the other 7 or 8. It's a good deal for both of us because otherwise you get nothing and I get 3%. So that might be a business idea that could be coming up and is likely to happen. And you're absolutely right. Anything else would be, I think, an unfair competition in respect of the other countries' agents.
Joachim, you mentioned earlier the CAS case, and we know the CAS case decision, the Court Arbitration Sport decision in ProFA v FIFA, that was after the injunction in the Dortmund court. If that ProFA case was already decided before the injunction, would that have influenced at all the German court or not?
Well, of course, it's kind of speculative, but I would say rather not, because state courts usually do not consider arbitration courts' decisions, even though, of course, CAS in general has a specific expertise in sports questions. However, I would rather say no, but anyhow, we will never know because it's speculative.
This may be speculative as well, but there's obviously a vacuum. There's a gap in the German agent regulatory market. Do you possibly see the German football agent regulation follow a similar route to, say, France or Italy, where football agent license comes under pretty much national legislation, where it's recognised by statute in France and Italy have the Olympic Committee as well as statutes in place around their football agents? Do you see that happening in Germany at all?
No, definitely not. The German state is not interested in any sports legislation. We are fighting on several issues in that regard, also in terms of players' rights and other things, but we don't have German state's law in sports, and they definitely will not render it. There are some general laws in terms of intermediaries, also, let's say, for houses or whatever, that apply also to football agents, that give certain guidelines and restrictions, but there's no state law about sports or football agents, and there will definitely not be a change in that.
There's an arbitration also in England, the Rule K arbitration, about the implementation by the Football Association and FIFA of the FFAR in England. Do you think that would have an impact as well? With that decision's probably going to happen before the 1st of October. Would Dusseldorf Court, for instance, take note of that decision, considering also from a commercial point of view, England's the biggest market in terms of agent fees and deals, and well, Saudi's coming up. You get my point. Do you think the Rule KR arbitration with fines in favour of agents or fines in favour of the FA vis-a-vis FIFA may have an impact on Germany?
Well, I'm pretty sure that the outcome will be presented in the Dusseldorf procedure by the party that may benefit from it, of course. But to answer your question, I don't know if they will take into account it. Usually they don't take into account arbitration court decisions, even more since, correct me if I'm wrong, I know that the arbitration under Rule K is formally an arbitration, but is it really an independent arbitration court such as CAS, or is it something installed and run by the FA? And if the latter would be the case, then the court definitely would not take it into account anyway, then, because then it would not even be a court that legitimately replaces state court jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think, well, the FA has also been, in this last month, been engaging with agents about their proposals that they want to implement the FFAR, but also supplement with their own regulations. So there has been engagement, but there is an arbitration, so we don't know where this is going to land. How do the German agents feel generally about the situation for, say, the next 6-7 months? We know that 10,000 plus are sitting the exam. There's already 3,000 licensed. 2,000 or so passed the exam, plus 2,000 legacy agents that had passed the exam before. You've obviously been contacted by German agents who've seen what's going on, especially since FIFA's announcements. What's everyone thinking in the German football agent industry at the moment about the situation, especially the next 5-6 months?
Well, of course, there's a lot of confusion as everywhere. And the good news for the agents is that at least for the winter transfer period, they can expect that they can go on with business as usual, because even if there is a hearing in Düsseldorf in January, the decision that follows this hearing is not to be expected within January. So the winter transfer window looks quite safe in respect of just going on as usual. And that is quite a relief for the German agents, because as everywhere in the world, nobody wants these regulations.
One interesting observation that I've had, a lot of people have asked me this, German agents can't have an exclusive contract with a German player, right? That's quite unique. Because if you look at the FFAR, you can have exclusivity, and you can have it geographically as long as within the 2 years, or you can have it exclusive for the 2 years. The player will decide that, obviously. But in Germany, that's quite unique. What's the reason behind it? Is it a case? Is it the way the DFB's gone? Can you just explain that?
It's actually a state law. That is what I mentioned before. We have certain laws that govern the professional activities of intermediaries in general, also on the properties, and anybody who is mediating something is subject to these state laws. And these state laws require that if you do mediation of employees, they may not be bound, as you say, on an exclusive basis, because obviously it's so important for an employee to find a job that he shall not be bound to someone on an exclusive basis. That is one specificity under German law. And again, to answer your question, it's state law, and it's mandatory. And the second part that is also foreign from state law is remuneration. Until now, of course, players are not used to pay their agents. However, if the FFAR are coming, that will be changing, obviously. And in Germany, we have a law that says the intermediation of an employee may not cost him more than 14% inclusive of VAT, which would be then about 11.5 net for the whole term of the contract. That means if you pay 3% for a 4-year contract, that would be 12% net. And 12% is obviously more than 11.5. And then you do not fall back to 11.5. But if you agree to 12, it's void. Then you get nothing. And that is also a conflict between the German state law and the Federation's regulations.
Thank you for that, because that's always been a question that's been asked. Because how do German agents operate without exclusivity? How do they manage the players? From your experience, how do they manage to keep players loyal when there's a lot of choices and a lot of good agents out there? Is it relationship business or?
Yeah, it is. Normally, so far, even though this will also have to change, obviously, we do not even have written contracts between players and agents because they are of no use, because you can terminate them all the time. So you can rely upon the invalidity of exclusivity. What is sometimes tried is to establish a management contract beneath the mediation relationship. And in the management contract, you can establish exclusivity. So you can kind of, through the back door, bind the player nevertheless. But even in the management contract, it's very difficult. Exclusivity is admissible. However, you may not exclude termination rights in a formula contract. And since once you start using a contract, it is a formula contract, the result is quite the same, only by another legal approach.
One final question. Is there any interesting trends happening in the German agent business that you've come across in dealings with agents in the last couple of years? Have commissions dropped? Are players doing more deals themselves? Are clubs very selective in dealing with certain agents?
I wouldn't say none of your examples, but what I observe is that in the last time, also probably as a reaction of toward the upcoming FFAR, agencies are merging, are growing, and they try to offer other services because they somehow need to make the money they might lose in intermediation by other means. So they offer management, social media, and whatever. Some of them did before, but some of them, sometimes you talk to players and ask them, how's your agent doing? He says, after I signed the contract 3 years ago, I didn't hear from him anymore. But that is something that really is changing since competition is getting harder and harder. And so they need to care more for the players and offer more services.
Yes, it's a very competitive business. And we know under the FFA, you only got 2 years. So there'll be only a 2-year contract. But really, thank you for coming on. You've really given some great insights and explanations on the German situation. We've been asked this a lot, this and Saudi, the Pro League, the two hottest issues at the moment. And a lot of agents really want to know what's going on. So really appreciate it, Joachim.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Joachim.
Thank you.
That was a very detailed and insightful analysis by Joachim. It pretty much reinforced the current ongoing legal situation, especially in Germany. But we also know that Belgium, and there's some action in Italy and other countries. We've got the Rule K arbitration, which is in England between agents and the English Football Association, waiting for the outcome of that. Very interesting point. But Joachim really summarized how German courts see other decisions, other arbitration decisions outside He also covered the exclusivity and how agents are dealing with the business, but more importantly, where he sees this matter going and how German agents are affected. But he also very interestingly raised the fact that he's been contacted by people from outside and inside Germany in terms of, I'm not saying loopholes, but basically how to deal with the situation in an effective manner. So very interesting observations by Joachim.
Absolutely. Now, it's not very often I'm lost for words on football agent-related matters, Peter. I'm sure you and many others will vouch for that. And although a lot of things FIFA and some of the other football authorities do on agent matters often leaves me baffled, I and everybody else still have something to say or can look at and analyse this. But with this one and the seemingly poorly worded media release from FIFA and the whole link to Germany phrase, I'm close to speechless, and at best I can only conjure up questions and quite a bit of laughter over the media release itself. Joachim's done his best to explain it there, and a very good explanation he's given. But it seems there's still a huge amount of questions and confusion over all of this.
There is. There's a lot of confusion. I mean, the term linkage can mean a lot of things, or links. I would say that right now, a lot of people don't know what really the position is. But then FIFA knows that its aim is to implement from the 1st of October. A lot of agents taking the exam. A lot of agents are licensed. So I think they needed to come out and take a position. And maybe the word linkage wasn't the right word, but they had to make this move. They had to announce it because we're not far away from October. So it's a little bit confusing, but that's where we stand now. And I think Joachim has highlighted where Germany fits in all this.
And on that point, Joachim also highlighted that the injunction in Germany was in May. We're now in September, and the time that it's taken. So to choose the right terminology, you could argue could have been selected a bit better. This isn't a knee-jerk reaction. But my question off the back of this is, are FIFA effectively going all in with their chips on this, saying, yes, we will challenge this, and that's January, if I'm not mistaken. But if we lose, we will go down with the ship. Now, that's all very well and good. But to use the ship analogy, at least put the passengers in lifeboats first. And by that, I mean the players, the clubs, the associations, and the agents. Just because you have steered head first into an iceberg, despite all the warnings, you still have to have an alternative, surely.
I think the position is still FIFA are the regulator for agents. The transfer window snapshot that we just discussed earlier is painting a picture of where the agent, in terms of the transfer market and agent fees, are at, but more importantly, the transfer market. FIFA's doing the research. They're compiling the information. They're presenting that as they did with the snapshot. I think there's a will there to regulate, to license. Now, we know there's still a lot of cases that haven't been decided, and we know the big one's going to be the European Court of Justice. However, FIFA has the will, I think, from my indications and the anecdotes and information that I've received, that they want to continue now. There may be court cases that go against them, but there will be some middle road. And that's where I think the transfer snapshot shows that FIFA are interested in the regulation of agents, what's going on in that space. And at the end of the day, there will be a framework or agents will have to follow, Jonathan.
We'll have to wait and see on that. Obviously, very unpredictable situation as it stands. And as we stated on the last podcast, there have been statements by FIFA and FIFA officials that the full revenue of all football agents is thus likely to be substantially higher than in FIFA reports like the Snapshot because of domestic transfer and agents' fees. And this Snapshot report reiterates that. Now, I think I referred to it as stating the bleedy obvious, and I still do. But substantially, even in that statement, is a very subjective term, and big transfers are often international ones, but some are more export-driven markets than others, as way back on episode 4, Guido highlighted with the comparison between Argentina and England. England's more import-orientated, Argentina's more export-orientated. That information in this snapshot report and other reports is still missing, as FIFA have failed to collate it, if not collect it, or have they chosen not to, as it doesn't suit the image they want to paint of agents for the implementation of what some would describe as draconian FFAR measures.
I think there's There's obviously FIFA wants to collate certain information, but at the end of the day, analytics, big data, putting all that information, there's always going to be gaps. I think FIFA is getting better in providing information and insights and trends. And these reports are getting better. I don't think they omit things, but if something is not certain, it has to be omitted. If it's not well researched or not well collated, it has to be omitted. So sometimes there are gaps in these reports.
I totally appreciate that. And to go back to the point of FIFA getting better on representation and transparency, if we look back to 2015, I think I'm right in saying, and a lot of people share the opinion, they couldn't actually get much worse. Now, a very important bit of information for me that is missing from this transfer snapshot, in addition to that, is in relation to who the paying client is for the agent services in each case. And as far as I can remember, this has been absent from previous reports, not just from FIFA, but from other football authorities as well, or it has been misrepresented. So in figure 3 of the transfer snapshot report, it details the spending fees for, as I said earlier, club agents. Again, note the term club agents. Not football agents, not player agents, but on that topic, I'll park that for now. However, on other information, it's reasonable to conclude either no players have paid agents for services in this mid-year window, or FIFA have failed or chosen not to collect it or represent it. Have FIFA somewhat lazily again rolled in the fees paid by player clients to agents under those of releasing club, or more likely the aging club who have paid agents? Or even worse, especially in the eyes of some national tax authorities, are FIFA arguably complicit in concealing the true nature of who the client is who pays for the agent services provided? This is all important information to present a true picture, or does it serve the FIFA narrative and give grounds for the old argument, and a somewhat relevant one in many cases, that you hear some fans and people in the media say that players should pay their agents, not the clubs? And that's an element that I agree with if it's put in the right context. Now, FIFA love a graph to try and prove their point, however skewed it is in trying to prove that point, as I experienced at CAS. And this report is no different. They highlight a 63.8% increase in the proportion of the agent's fees compared to the transfer fees in this mid-year transfer window. But what is worth noting, in an almost comparatively small font in this graph used by FIFA, are the range of dates here. And I touched on this earlier. This is not a comparison of the increase of 63.8% over 1 year between 2022 and 2023. They have chosen a comparison period over 9 years between 2013 and 2023. And I will point out it's in a small font and quite a transparent font, but it's in the report all the same. It takes a prominent position, and I just think that's a disingenuous representation of what is actually happening with agents' fees compared to the transfer fees.
My view is a bit different. I think we've seen the transfer fees go up, and that means agent fees will go up. And it also we're seeing different dynamics at play, different markets appear. We've got obviously Saudi now, and we've had the English Premier League for a long time, and MLS, and before that China, as I mentioned before. So I think as the transfer fees go up, and I've mentioned add-ons as well, agent fees will go up. But this is where now FIFA's drawing a line. They're saying we're going to cap things, and this is where the legal battles are happening about whether caps are viable or, more importantly, illegal. It is a long period of 10 years, and it will show an increase. But that's the information that's been collected, and agents play a very important role. And that's why we're on this podcast. They play a very important role in the business, in getting opportunities for clients, in brokering deals. That's all going to flow.
And of course, that's something we openly try to do. We try to present both sides of the case, don't we, Peter? We disagree in our opinions on some things and not on others. And we are representing the views and opinions sometimes of people we don't even agree with. So it's good that we can talk about this. But back to the transfer snapshot report, and this is going to be my last point. I will give everybody a break after this. But this is important for me, especially in the current climate over football agent regulations. And you mentioned capping, which is the most contentious of the issues with FFAR. In the report, amongst FIFA's closing paragraphs in their media release, not the transfer snapshot itself, but their media release that accompanied it, they stated, and I quote, "Agents' fees also reached a new high with US dollars 696.6 million paid during the mid-year window, bringing the total for 2023 to date to US dollars 853 million, which is 36.9% higher than in the whole of 2022 and more than in any other year." I don't take objection to that. That is a statistic that's been generated, but I do take exception to how it's represented and how it's not compared. Yet, transfer fees in that mid-year window period rose by 47%. And we're led to believe agents' fees by only 37%. So agents' fees in this window have actually risen by less than transfer fees. It's all comparative. As other fees rise in football, transfer fees, salaries and that, it's relevant to accept agent fees rise. But I'm surprised to an extent by that, but it's not surprising that FIFA don't highlight it in the current climate. And on reflection, I think realistically, not very much of the information in this snapshot is focused on agents. And that which is represented is actually quite questionable for how relevant or truly representative it is. There are probably more questions than answers from the transfer snapshot. So we await the more in-depth review, which I think is due around January time, which will give us more information. And it's quite a comprehensive report usually. And I hope that in being more comprehensive, it is truly reflective on agent matters. If agents are the bad guys in these reports, don't base it on graphs, bad statistics and spin. That's all I ask. Base it on good statistics, solid representation, and things that are truly comparative.
But there was an article before we close that I noticed this week in the Independent newspaper. Independent newspaper being an English newspaper and not behind a paywall. I won't go into the full article. However, this article entitled "How FIFA is Leading the Push for Football Transfer's Biggest Change Since the Bosman." It was written by Miguel Delaney. But this article features super agents, FIFA, the Association of Football Agents being the English Agents Association, the Court of Arbitration of Sport and how it ruled in relation to the Profa v FIFA matter, the District Court of Germany. We talked about the European Court of Justice previously and also the German court's decisions with our guest. This article is fascinating as it looks at all the, I would say, the protagonists.
I totally agree on the basis of the article. I found it quite refreshing. And you know, I pick articles like this apart for being biased in one way or another. But this one was very well weighted, I found. It gives food for thought for those who have been heavily invested in the topic of FFAR like ourselves, or people who are new to it, just looking from the outside in and wondering what all the fuss is about. It gives the arguments from one side and the counter side. And I think a lot of people could benefit from having a good read of that. So on that positive note, it's time to bring this episode of The Agent's Angle to a close. As ever, thank you for joining myself and Peter. And we hope that you have found our first 10 episodes of interest, if not of use to you. We aim to continue that in the episodes to come. But we welcome you getting in touch with us via email, the various social media channels, such as the show's LinkedIn page, Instagram, and other channels.
Also, our listeners, any topics you would like us to cover, guests you would like to hear from, or pose any questions, please get in touch with us. We're happy to try to get those guests on board. Also, please leave a positive review and rating for the show, as well as the various episodes. If you haven't listened to all the episodes, there's plenty there, different topics. And of course, tell your colleagues and friends about us and to tune in. So with that, bye from me.
And bye from me.
The purpose of the Agent's Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.